Okay, well, let's get started here, I guess. Off to a little a little rough start. But here we go. Welcome back to Tech Talk with Grandpa. And this is number 7. We're going to talk about napkin conversations as well as startup life. Let's just go ahead and get started. Let me see. What am I going to start with? Thanks, everyone, for being here. And if you're watching this later, thanks for watching at some point. And if you want to give me a like, that's great. Alright, so we're going to start out with this thing right here. This thing, let me go over here so I can see what I'm doing. Come on. Are we going to focus tonight? Come on. Dang this thing. Here we go. All right, light bulb. Yes, a light bulb was the start of our conversation because that basically was the spark that lit all the startups in the United States, I believe. Now, why is that? We're going to get over here. We're going to talk about started with this guy, Fred Turman. He was a professor at Stanford University. Probably he was, I know he was there in the 30s, and he was probably there all the way through the 60s. And he was electrical engineering professor, and he taught these two guys here. That guy he's shaking hands with is Bill Hewitt, and the taller one over there is David Packard. And those two gentlemen got together, and they graduated from Stanford, and they started working on some projects in their in this garage. This garage in Palo Alto, California. Back behind this house, and Bill Hewitt and David Packard were working on some electronics back there, and this is kind of what their lab looked like. And these are the tools that they had access to. So if we kind of look around at some of these tools, we have these are variable resistors down here. They had some meters. They brought their coffee cups, a little light. They had coffee in here, and they had a little vise. Here's their ever important slide rule. This is kind of what it looked like back in about 1938-39. They had a drill press. They're building something over here, and there's a old wood-handled screwdriver. So what did they make? Those two guys were making these things up here. We go back up here to. They were making oscillators. And they're making oscillators for this guy. This, of course, is Mickey Mouse. And Mickey Mouse hit the big stage in a movie called Fantasia. And Bill Hewitt and David Packard started selling these things here, these oscillators. Their first design, they started selling it to Disney for the movie Fantasia. And when they started their company, they flipped a coin, and I guess Hewlett won. So the company's name was Hewlett Packard, but it could have been named Packard Hewlett, depending on that coin toss. So if you go back and look at the nation listings for historical places in the United States, this garage is one of those, because this is the birthplace of the Silicon Valley. Happened in that garage. And those two guys started selling this original oscillator. It's called the HP200A. And why we're talking about this little light bulb here is that the light bulb was used as part of that was actually the topic of Hewlett's master's thesis there at Stanford, and he used it as a component in this oscillator in a feedback network to stabilize the voltage level. So if we kind of come over here and look at the schematic for this HP200A, and kind of zoom in here. So here's the schematic for the oscillator portion of it. It has a 2 pentodes, SJ7 and a 6F6. And here's that light bulb down in the down here in the circuit, and it basically stabilizes the amplitude that comes out of this oscillator. This oscillator output is right over here, and then it's fed into an audio amplifier. Here's the amplitude volume control basically. It goes into a triode, and it goes into a 6V6 to the output transformer over here. So the original design was the first product that came out of the so-called Silicon Valley. It wasn't turned that until the silicon came out. But what happened because of that was that they started their company. And they actually sold these, getting over here, they actually sold the 200s, both the A, the B, the AB, and the C version of this for almost 33 years, all the way up until about 1973. Meanwhile, around 1973, there were a couple of young men also out in the Silicon Valley, these two guys here, and they were into phreaking. Phreaking back in the 70s was an early term before there were computers, and people that tried to circumvent the telephone network were called phreakers. And these two gentlemen here decided to make this box called the blue box. And this blue box here, one of those gentlemen, the guy there on the left, he ended up the guy on the right ended up designing the circuit for this, and the guy on the left ended up selling about 200 of these units. And those two gentlemen went on to start making computers, and here's a picture of them a little bit later building the Apple I computer. So that, of course, is Steve Jobs standing up and Steve Wozniak sitting down, and that's the foundation of the Apple Computer Corporation. Let's go on to let's move into current day. So we have this guy here. He graduated from Harvard at some point and developed something in his dorm room with a bunch of other people and started Facebook. And we kind of all know what the history of what happened after Facebook hit the market. Oops. All right, so let's get my let's get my act together. You got a little preview there of what's going to happen. All right, if I was on the right screen, I could get this out of the way. All right, so let's talk about what happens when you when you come up with an idea. Now, I've had a discussion in my career. Now, I've been doing this since 1988. I've been working, so I don't remember what I told you was. I didn't even know how to do the math on that. Was that 40 years? 40 years or so. No, 30 plus years. And I have this thing called a napkin discussion, and I've kind of called it in my own head, is where someone comes to me and they say, hey, I got an idea. And I'm like, okay. And they tell me what their idea is. And sometimes people say, that's an idea. Why don't you take it and run with it and make $1 million and just, keep me in the loop. That's one kind of discussion. And then I've learned to kind of say, wow, that's, ideas. I hear a lot of ideas. The idea isn't good enough, and then they typically typically say, this thing sells itself. This thing will sell itself. It's so great, it'll sell itself. And I just like, well, okay, well, you have the passion to fulfill your idea. I don't have that passion. And they're like, well, what does that mean? I'm like, well, I'm not going to take your idea and run with it. It wasn't my idea. It's your idea, and you need to run with it. And so let's say that they do. Let's say that they think it's such a great idea. They're going to set out and change the world. They're going to make $1 million. It's a great thing, and they're going to start. And so that's the next kind of conversation. And I don't know if these people actually know about the garage in Palo Alto where HP got started. But they come out and say, well, can we start making this in my garage? And I kind of like, I'm at the point now where I kind of have done enough startups that I kind of want to have a really pretty frank conversation at this point. Now, in this Tech Talk with Grandpa, I'm not here to discourage you. If you have an idea on a napkin, I'm not here to tell you don't do it. I'm here to tell you what's involved from going from your napkin here with an idea on it. Let me see here. You got your napkin here. I'm making something up here. I'm going to sell it to a customer. They're going to pay me, and then I'm going to get rich. Okay, this is my idea. I'm not here to tell you not do that. In fact, I'm going to end up at the end of this telling you you should do it. I'm going to tell you what you should look out for, what's going to happen, and why you should end up doing it. So I'm not here to discourage you. I'm here to encourage you. All right, one thing you need to have money to live on. And if you don't have the talent, you need to find other people to help you out. And so the first thing that they want to offer to you is, I'll give you stock if you help me for free. And that's called sweat equity. So you put in your sweat, and I will give you equity in the company. Now, what money am I going to live on if I'm working for free? So that doesn't quite work out. So then you have people doing work in part-time. So I'm going to work in the evenings on this idea. And the people that are helping me are going to work on the weekends. And it gets to a point where things drag on for so long, people get disillusioned with the idea. Now remember, the guy with the napkin is the only one that has the passion. So at some point, you have to find an angel investor. So an angel investor is someone that comes in, might be your parents, it might be your savings account, whatever. There's some angel person that comes in and gives you the initial money to get going. But in order to find an angel investor, you need to have this thing they call it an elevator pitch. And that's a 30-second pitch about what your idea is. You have 30 seconds to do it. And typically the scenario is you get in the elevator, somebody asks you, what are you doing? You have 30 seconds before the door opens and they walk out to sell them on that. And you're going to have this conversation in addition to the elevator pitch with angel investors hundreds of times. And what typically happens in the initial napkin discussion is the person with the idea is very protective. They don't want to tell anybody what their idea is. And I kind of start laughing at that point. I kind of giggle and I say, you're going to need to talk a lot about your idea to get it out there, to get the idea out there and have other people join your passion. And then they almost immediately want to get an NDA going, which is a non-disclosure agreement, which if you sign an NDA, that means you're not going to reveal information about what happens in this conversation. And I kind of like, that's not the time to do it. You don't take the idea and come up with an NDA. It's way too early. No ideas are actually end up, most of these napkin ideas, there's just thousands of them and they never go anywhere. In order to talk to the angel investor, they need to understand how much is this thing going to cost. And you're at the point where you have a napkin, you have no idea how much it's going to cost. So you have to do a little research and figure out how much it's going to cost. And that cost is going to be involved in engineering, paying people, fabrication, building prototypes, all that kind of thing. And you're going to get to a point where you're going to have to ballpark guess what the production costs to make 1,000 of these units. When you're buying parts or getting things made, the 1K pricing is where discounts really begin to hit, and you start seeing price reductions on a lot of costs involved, both in parts as well as in manufacturing. So, not to stop you now. Just keep going. Okay, the next thing is you're going to hire a lot of engineers. I'm going to tell you. Let's say that you have an engineer on the project. I'm here to tell you, engineers are not designers. Those are two distinct people. Engineer figures out how to do something. Designer designs what it's going to look like. Engineers are not designers. If I look at all the things that I do, I am not a designer. If I have to develop a website, it looks like crap. All right, colors are wrong, sizing's wrong, everything's wrong. Functionally, it works fine for me, but as an attractive thing for someone else. So that and enclosures. Enclosures are a whole artwork, a whole art form in and of itself, and there is a term for these kind of people in the industry called industrial designers. So first thing to know is engineers are not designers. And if your idea is okay, let's say your idea is really good, the timing's right, and it takes you a long time to develop it. And that basically every day you're losing the opportunity to come out first with a product. So at some point you need to hire experience in to shorten your development time. So you got to get off this part-time business and start hiring people. And if your design is a better mousetrap, then that iteration on a design. Let's say a product exists already, and the company has been selling this, and they come out with new versions of this thing along the way, and you are going to come up with a better one. So this is where the experience comes in. You have to hire people with experience that can get that new mousetrap designed and on the market very quickly. But your competition now has been making these already. They have that experience, and they're already working on something. So napkin ideas that are better mousetraps aren't going to really pan out, because your competition is the existing marketplace, and those people are actively developing the next version. In fact, you might just get started and they already come out the next version, and now what you're working on, you have to scrap it and start over again. All right, so you have 5 things that you have to, in order to really kind of get going. Your timing has to be right. There has to be a market for your product. You have to find the talent. You have to find the money, and honestly, you got to have a lot of luck. It's got to work out. So let's say all those things are in place. And now you need to come up with the minimal viable product. In the startup world, they call this the MVP. So that's kind of where I come in. Companies are at the point where they need to have a prototype, and they will end up hiring me to develop a prototype. And so I come up with something that maybe fulfills 80% of the initial napkin design. And with that, they can do 2 things. They can have a different conversation going forward to find investors, and they kind of have a benchmark that they want to improve upon to actually develop the first iteration of the product. So my goal as an MVP developer is I need to make things fast. So I need to make circuit boards fast. I need to write software fast. I need to have that software talk to backends fast. I need to develop, cell phone apps. I need to be able to do that as fast as possible, because they're going to pay me a lot of money to develop their MVP, and then they're going to take that and actually go to the next step and go beyond the angel investor and actually have some additional money come in. So some variety of options to start obtaining money, because you need the money to hire the experience to actually build the to find the people to help you build this product. So you can find other investors. Now, other investors are people that come in and you want to show them the MVP, and you kind of convince them of the passion and your passion and your product and your market and your pricing, and you basically sell them shares in your company, and you take that share money that you sold to them and invest more into capital equipment, more people, whatever. You can go down the venture capital route. So, venture capital route, you work with a VC, and you sell them your vision. You give them a presentation. They look at your financials. They look at their own market. They do some analysis, and then they come in and they basically purchase a major portion of your company. Sometimes it might be 80%, 90%, and then they do that, and they want to put a bunch of financial resources into it, and they also want to bring in experience. So they'll bring in marketing people, they'll bring in designers, they'll bring in other people that are well known to them, to minimize their risk for the investment that they made in your company. And at some point, as part of this agreement, a lot of the founders are forced out of the company. So your napkin idea may result, if you bring in a venture capital, it may result in you being kind of forced out of the company that you started, because it's that person with the passion a lot of times can't work beyond the passion part of it, and they become a stumbling block to actually make the company successful. So you're going to say, okay, I'm not going to do any of that. I'm just going to put it on Kickstarter. Okay, so Kickstarter is it's a great idea, because what happens if you have a successful Kickstarter, there's a market, you establish a market, because you find the customers willing to buy your first product. So you not only establish a market, so people actually would want it. The next is the funding. So you have the funding to make the first production run, and you get the if the Kickstarter becomes successful, the funding comes in, and that results in sales. But Kickstarter has Kickstarter has two things to be just aware of. So we're going to switch over here to the other slide, if I can figure out where my mouse is. All right, here's a successful Kickstarter. The Coolest Cooler came out about 3 years ago. If you look down here, they were looking for $50,000 for their goal. And if you look at they had different pledge levels, and they had an awesome video for people to buy this thing. And they ended up getting funded at the level of $13 million. And you're thinking, holy cow, that's a lot. They had 62,000 backers. So their problem was they were wildly successful. So probably their initial run, they wanted to make 1,000 of these. Now they're going to make like 13,000 of these coolers. That's a completely different manufacturing issue. Now, because it's Kickstarter, your initial benefit of supporting this Kickstarter is that you get to buy the item at reduced cost. So, because it's your initial run, you have a lot of expenses, which are fine. But a lot of times in wildly successful projects like the Coolest Cooler, your sales price ends up being gives you a little bit of margin over the manufacturing costs. So you could get done with this entire Kickstarter. And hired all these people, did all this work, and you really, after the end of it, you have very little money left over to show for it. So they got $13 million, but I don't know how much money was left over after they take all the costs out of it. And Coolest Cooler had a lot of controversy because the sales volume was so high that they had, they had problems actually manufacturing this. And in fact, somehow the Coolest Cooler was available on Amazon as a purchasable product from Amazon, and people were buying it and getting the Coolest Cooler before the initial Kickstarter backers had got their coolers. So this one had a lot of controversy towards the end. Okay, so let's say you don't want to do any of that. Oh, let's say whatever you're going to pick. Your strategy is you're either going to get an investor, you're going to find a venture capitalist, you're going to do a Kickstarter, whatever that is. Along the development cycle, you may end up developing a technology, the thing you were trying to develop itself. You can't do it, it's too expensive, whatever that is, but you develop some technology to get to where you were initially going to go, and you found another market along the way. And so a lot of startups actually do this thing called a pivot, where let's say they're going to develop this product, and along the way, halfway get done, they say let's not go this way, let's go this way, and they pivot and they develop something else. A lot of companies at some point pivot, and I don't know how many. I don't even know what the statistics are on that. But if you hear the term pivot, that means the original mission has changed to the company from what they actually got started to do. So that would be like, I don't know, those HP guys along the way pivot and they start making guitar amplifiers instead of test equipment. All right, so another thing to do is if you're a founder, you're the one with the idea there. You have to think about an exit strategy. How long do I want to do this for? If it's wildly successful, when do I want to get out? What are the conditions for me to get out? Do sales have to be at this level? Do we have to be in business for 5 years? Do I know that the company can survive without me? Whatever that is. When you first start out, you want to know the exit strategy. And a lot of those investors, as well as the angel investor, the one at the beginning, they want to know what is the conditions for you to actually get out of the company. So that's what it's called, an exit strategy. So let's say you have an idea. It's a widget, and the widget's going to get sold to a customer. And let's say the widget does something, and it connects to your cell phone, and you're going to sell a lot of these. Let's say it's like a Fitbit, okay, something along those lines. It's some new thing that just doesn't exist before. It's a great idea. Let's get started. So I'm going to tell you about what's involved, and if you're going to start a company, what you're going to get, what kind of talent is going to come along the way that you're going to get exposed to. So you have the engineering people. So you might have a mechanical engineer and all of the various disciplines in a mechanical engineer. In engineering, now on the electrical engineering side, when I was going to school, there were 7 major disciplines. You had analog design, digital design, control theory, RF, DSP, and power. Was that 7? I don't know. Well, you see, there's a lot of disciplines. So just by knowing a double E doesn't mean you know a double E with the experience to do what you actually need to get done. And like I said before, you need to there's a designer. So you're going to you need to have someone that's actually going to do the industrial design. And if you're going to make a lot of these things, you need to have a manufacturing engineer to kind of coordinate the activities. Either you're building it in-house or you're building it through contractors. You have to have a manufacturing engineer to kind of keep all that stuff synchronized. You're going to have some firmware people that write devices down on the hardware. You're going to have software people. And if it involves if it involves data collection, you're going to have a series of back-end people to work on the server side. You're going to have people that they're called DevOps, which are the people that deploy software to your cloud infrastructure. You're going to need an app developer, and that app developer needs to be well versed in doing iOS as well as Android devices. Now, there's a thing called Flutter that's come out from Google that's supposed to be able to be cross-platform and deploy cross-platform apps on both iOS and Android. You're going to have your quality assurance people. Those people there, the quality assurance people, are not only for to look at the requirements of the product and look at the software implementation of it, but they test, they'll test the back end stuff. They'll test the web interface. They'll test the device interface. And then QA is also involved in, if you're doing any external manufacturing, you're bringing in parts, they're going to validate the quality of the parts, the accuracy of the part that was delivered, and there's a lot of people that work in quality, and it's also called verify and verification. Validation and verification. You have the testers. You have the people that test out the hardware and the software. You have alpha testers, and a lot of times that's just kind of friends of the company or employees at the company. And then you have your beta testers, which are customers that are not associated with the company at all, that really have no idea what your product does, and you want to solicit ideas from them. Then you have someone who really understands marketing of both traditional sales as well as online presence type of thing, and understand marketing and branding. You're going to have people in sales. What do the people in sales do? So now you have quite a little bit of a company now. You're gonna need an accountant, because you're going to be buying stuff. You're going to spend money's coming in and out. You're going to need an accountant. You're also going to need someone that does your payroll, and you're going to need a lawyer. And you're going to need a lawyer for various reasons. Maybe there's I don't know. You have to file a patent. You have to formalize documents of incorporation. Whatever they end up doing, you have to have a lawyer either on staff, or you're going to pay one to be part of what your support activities. You're going to have to project manager. You have to project manager kind of look at how things are going and kind of see what to keep people on the timeline and that type of thing. If you're building something, you're going to have technicians to kind of when circuit boards come in, have to have a technician go through, work through and see if the circuit boards are actually functioning correctly. If you're making them, the idea is that the products in-house, you have the production staff. Enclosure comes in from someplace, you have the circuit boards come in from somewhere else, it's tested, those are assembled, put together, that's put in a box, and the box is packed. So those are the kind of the staffing people. Then you have other managers in there as well. And I'm probably forgetting a lot of people. Well, all this activity needs to be located somewhere. So you're going to have a location that you're going to have to lease or rent. Then you're going to need insurance for that location. And you're going to need to pay workman's compensation insurance. And you need to pay for health insurance. And you need to pay for the benefits that you're going to offer your employees. And you have to have somebody for inventory control. And if you start selling this to the public, you're going to have a customer service representative or department that deals with issues with your customers. You're going to have someone who really understands social media and and actually work with the customer service component of social media. And you may end up having a compliance officer. So compliance officer verifies that you're meeting state or local, state, federal regulations, or your product may actually need other certifications like UL or CSA or CE, or there's issues having to deal with your both safety and your markings that go out on your box. So all those people, you're going to have to find them, and you're going to have to pay them, and you're going to have to keep them busy. All right, so you're thinking, wow, that's a lot of people. I never thought about all these. Well, that's why I'm giving you this tech talk here. So after all this, you're like, it's too much. I'm not going to do it, but I'm going to tell you why. Why should you do a startup? Well, one, it's invigorating. The energy at a startup is so positive. People are working hard. They see the vision. They want to contribute it, and they're doing their thing. And everywhere I go that I work in a startup, people are excited about the energy level at a startup is really high, and it's a lot of fun. There's a group of people that are sharing this vision, and we're collectively working together to implement this thing. Are we going to become rich? Are we going to save the world? Are we going to come up with something new? Whatever the motivation is, people get excited about it. They're invigorated, and it's fun. It's also really stressful, because if you don't have enough cash, you end up having to, you might have to work with things that you don't have access to because there's no financial money around to buy something. So you have to figure out ways to implement ideas with little cash involved. Here's the next one that's kind of big for what you're doing is if you work at a startup, it's going to impact your relationships that you have with your spouse, with your family, with your kids, whatever it is going to impact that. I'll talk a little bit about that in the future, in a few minutes. And it's risky. Why should you do it? It's risky. Your chances of getting all this together is pretty slim. I don't know what the failure rate of startups is, but it's pretty high. So if you I'm going to talk a little bit more about this impact to relationships, but I'm going to have to move over to the bench to show you some other things. So I got, let me see, I got to move the camera. So I think I need the camera to be over that way a little bit, and I need to move the microphone out. And we're just going to move over to the bench and show you what's next. So I got this thing here. This is one of the first guitar amplifiers I worked on. It's an old record player. It's an old record player that I took the platen out of, and the motor and all that stuff, and I made a guitar amplifier out of it. So it has an 8-inch speaker here, and see if I can get this out. Stuck to the speaker. There we go. I'm going to turn this on now. I think this has a 6F6 in it and maybe a pentode. It's very similar to that thing that's in the oscillator for the amplifier portion of the oscillator. Let me see here. Is it going to work? It's warming up. And this is the part where there's a question I pose to all these. It's a question I pose to people. I work with a lot of people that work at startups. A lot of the founders, the young kids that are getting started. They're just living their dream. And I give them one piece of advice for doing what they're about to do or their life. And so let's go ahead and tune up here. Good enough. All right, here we go. Is this going to work? And Joe Strummer said it all. Should I stay or should I go? That's the question that everyone that works at a startup asks themselves every day. Every day they ask themselves, should I stay or should I go? Let's talk about that question let's talk about this one. Should I stay or should I go? And your impact to relationships. 5 o'clock comes around and you know that you have a lot of work to do at your startup. Should I stay late or should I just go home? A lot of times you're thinking, your justification for staying is, I really need to get this done. Or if this company is wildly successful, my family will be set for a really long time. So I'm going to stay. Or I'm just going to say, nope, it's 5 o'clock, 5:30, I'm going to go home. I'm going to go home and turn it off. I'm going to come back the next day, and that's it. I was posed with this question because I've worked at, at least 10 startups. I always stayed. And I didn't have really any relationships not because of that, but that staying actually affects a lot of relationships. A lot of people that work at startups work too much, and they get burned out, or they get sick. I think at the first startup, I had a cold for about 2 years, and I lived in Florida and I had a cold for about 2 years because I didn't get enough sleep. But I always chose to stay, and when I give these young kids that are going down this road, I tell them, you should go. Don't stay. You need the time off to both recharge and have relationships outside your company. So if of anything that you get out of this whole Tech Talk with Grandpa, at 5 o'clock, Joe Strummer comes in your head, should I stay or should I go now? You should go now. Okay. Well, there you go. All right, let's show you some stuff here. My first startup, was it a couple weeks ago? Yeah, a couple weeks ago I talked about that programmable chemical additive injector. The programmable additive injector, the pack. And that resulted, those guys sold a bunch of those and they wanted to start a new company. A friend of mine from college and myself started we convinced the founders of that petroleum company to start another company that we called our company Wireless Scientific, and what we made were data radios. Because let's say that you have, in this example for the petroleum industry, you have the pack sitting out at the terminal, and then the data needs to get back into the office. So you have this underground conduit that needs to get put in, and in order to put that in, they have to shut the terminal down. They have to bring in a trencher and cut through the concrete, lay in the conduit, put the concrete back down again, fish the wires through, all that stuff. They have to do that. Why don't they just use a radio for that? And this was 1994-ish. There wasn't really the notion of cell phone stuff really wasn't that big. There wasn't that big. Wireless stuff back then really didn't exist, and it certainly didn't exist for the petroleum industry. So this is the first product actually developed at a startup. Here's our logo, Wireless Scientific. our marketing guy came up with this. And this is what we're calling a CK232. So you put these things were sold in pairs, and in here you have you put your 232 in here at whatever baud rate you can log into this thing kind of and set the baud rate for this port, and then it transmits data over the wireless and comes out the port on the other side. So these were dedicated pairs, and see if I can get this to focus. I think this needs a better light on it. So you put power in and it tells you transmit and receive and if it's connected or not. Alright, so it did this guy. And inside of here is it's a circuit board, and it fits in that box. Now I remember this because this thing fit into a thing called a Lansing box, which is a company in Lansing, Michigan that made this enclosure. And then somebody else came up, some other designer came up with the front panel for this, as well as picking the enclosure and the colors and all that stuff, because this is not something that I wanted to do. So that's what I'm talking about. We had a designer in-house kind of think about how to do the packaging for this. But inside of here we had a module in here. This is one of the commercially available spread spectrum modules. This one did direct sequence spread spectrum. We purchased this module, and then we built a interface down here to go from the digital signaling coming out of here going out to the port. And this used a PIC microcontroller that was available. Now the PIC microcontroller had the UARTs in it, and it had RAM in it, and it had EEPROM for the program space. It had some additional features that it probably didn't have an A to D back then, but it had some peripherals inside the microprocessor, so it's nowhere near as complicated as the Intel design I had done like 2 years earlier, because that design had external RAM and external, everything is external to the microprocessor. This one's actually like an embedded processor, and I'll show you what those look like. Because I have some of them left over in my parts bin. So these are PIC 16C74s, 73s, and you could get these. These are later versions of them. The first versions of them were window parts. They look like this here. Yeah, I think it's the lighting over here. So they have this little window in here, and the way that you would erase the EEPROM, the program space in the microprocessor, is you would put it under an ultraviolet light. Now, I didn't actually have an ultraviolet light. I just stuck these out in the sun. And in Florida, you could stick them out in the sun, and about 20 minutes later, they'd be erased. So anyway. Okay, so part of this design was we designed that interface for 232. I also designed an interface for 485. So this fit in a different enclosure, but this one is like an industrial version of a 485 because it does both 2 and 4 wire, 232 and 485, 422 and 485. So this would hook up to industrial equipment. We had one more here. We worked with the Heart Foundation. Heart Communications this is a transceiver that was developed by NCR for the heart, and the heart protocol runs over a thing called a 4 to 20 milliamp loop. A lot of industrial sensors and actuators work on this thing called a 4 and 20 milliamp circuit. So there's a loop and whatever. But we are working particularly with the petroleum industry, so we needed to work in this thing called a Class 1 Div 1 environment, and that is the presence of hazardous vapor. So if you pull into a gas station, while you're filling up your car, there's flammable vapor. I don't want to freak you out here, but there's a potential that vapor comes out of your tank because you're putting fluid into the tank, displacing that volume, and the air that's been in the tank is flowing out of your nozzle on your gas tank on your car. And that if the if that vapor is concentrated enough, it is flammable. So that's why you can't smoke when you're pumping your gas and that kind of thing. So Class 1 Div 1 is at a 4-foot level down around the bay of pumps at a gas station is Class 1 Div 1. Because of that, we needed to get a Class 1 Div 1 rating on a radio that would work at these terminals. And so I developed a spark arresting technology to suppress any kind of sparks that came out if there was a break in the antenna, because we used these little rubber ducky antennas, and developed something for that, and I got it tested up in Canada at CSA, but I got a CSA was able to test to UL standards in the United States, and we got a NERDL certification, which is, that lab was a nationally recognized testing lab. They tested to UL standards, so we effectively got a UL rating on this explosion-proof radio, and that was totally unique in the industry. Okay, from the startup perspective, after that company, after I left there, that's when I ended up working for the medical guys, and then I got fired. And then I moved up to Boston, and I started another startup with, my second startup was with 3 people that I knew at Georgia Tech. And they ended up developing a lot of the DSP code for analog devices. Had announced out that they were going to start selling a CPU called a Spark, and it had the DSP cores in with the CPU, and they developed a lot of C libraries for that. And then I moved and I wrote the book, and eventually I ended up working for another startup called Splash Encounters, where I put multimedia devices in water park slides, the little slides you go on. We ended up putting basically screens in the slide as well as audio. I worked for a startup there. I worked for a startup that was out of Telluride that wanted to develop high quality Bluetooth earpieces that were Bluetooth. We're at the very first iteration when you could do Bluetooth audio. I worked for a company over there. And then when I moved up to where I am now, I worked for a solar company here in town, and I was an architect over there. And that was probably the best startup environment that I'd worked in, because by then I'd had enough experience to kind of know what I was up against. And actually, between the very first startup at Wireless Scientific and this startup here in town called Brightleaf, this is where I kind of developed all this knowledge base that I'm kind of covering tonight. And I left there at some point, and then I also had a Napkin conversation with another company in town, and what they wanted to implement was a design that involved mechanical design, electrical design, process control, and they had a lot of their architecture that they were looking at was huge. And I kind of convinced them that they're going to need a lot of money to do this, and they wanted to go down the garage route, and they started doing that. And at some point they wanted to bring me in and have me do some more work for them, and I had to have a frank conversation with them. I remember going down to Applebee's and had lunch with them, and I brought somebody else, a financial guy, with me, who would go out and find funding for a lot of these startups. And the 3 of us had a conversation, and I wrote down a lot of the things I showed you in the previous discussion about all the people that are going to be involved. And I said, look, David, if you want to continue with this thing, you're looking at funding at about $1 to $2 million just to get started. And he's like, I think that's kind of high. And I'm like, no, I'm telling you right now. So he says, well, why is that? And I said, we want to do it fast. And he had this outrageous development schedule. I said, okay, if you want to do it that fast, you're going to have to hire people that are experienced. He goes, yes, I plan on doing that. And you're going to have to convince them to move from wherever they are to here to work in your company. And no one's going to do that. I'm just telling you right now, anyone with experience is not going to move to work with your company at where they are now. They're just not going to do it. And he's like, okay, well, why is that? And he goes, it's just too risky for them. They already have a good job where they are. They're not going to move to a small town where we are and we're doing this thing. They're not going to do it. They're just not going to do it. So you're going to be left with less talented people. Your development time frame is going to be longer, and then you're going to have all these issues that I talked about earlier. I worked with a company out of this venture accelerator in Telluride that had a Bluetooth solution for fitness, for like in a gym. And those guys are still going, actually. And then another company called me and wanted me to work on a graphene startup, work at a graphene startup with them, and become kind of one of the additional electrical engineers to help them out. So I had a lot of conversations with them, and I realized that wasn't for me either, so I got out of that. And currently right now I'm working for a company here in town that works on e-textiles, where you can sew electronics into fabric and make things like backpacks or clothing or various types of things. And so I'm working with a company here in town to do that. All right, so make a long story short, 5 things have to happen in order for your startup to work. You have to have timing, you have to have a market, you have to find talent, you have to find money, and a lot of luck involved in what you're doing. So if you have an idea and you're down at this level, just let it be known that it's a long road to get from a napkin into becoming a company that has products that you sell on a market, and you're competitive, and you have employees, and I'm encouraging you to do it. I really am. If you have that idea and you're young, you should go for it. You should go down this road, because the amount of things you're going to learn at a startup are enormous. Whatever job you end up working at, everything you learn at a startup you can take into future employment. And actually, employers actually want to know about your startup experience. If you list it on a like a resume or something, they want to know. They want to know, what did you try to do? What was why did you fail? And what did you learn? And it's they like hiring people with startup experience, because those people know how to take a risk and how to get things done. All right, well, I think that's it for this evening. If you made it this far, I'd like to thank you. And we will catch you next time on Tech Talk with Grandpa. Good night.